to you. I'd heard about Reservoir Dogs, but the first film I saw was Pulp Fiction. And I saw Pulp Fiction with this girl that I was dating when I first moved to Los Angeles. And I remember being in Mann's Chinese Theater watching this.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like this crazy change in my life.
That was in the first few weeks of it opening, yeah, because that's where it opened.
Yeah. Crazy change in my life, moving to Los Angeles and then seeing this film. And then I remember very clearly, like at the end of the film, like even in the middle of the film, going, this is the craziest fucking movie I've ever seen in my life. And this scene, it symbolized to me like the world was changing, like everything was changing. It was so wild and so crazy. It was a film it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. All the different timelines, how you interwove everything together, but the violence and the chaos and the humor of all of it, like people walked out of that movie theater fucked up.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, wow, like the world is different. Like sometimes you'll see a work of art, something, and you'll say that thing just changed everything. It just, it was so wild that it influenced so many other films afterwards. They tried to be like a Pulp Fiction movie, or they tried to be wild.
Well, people would ask me about that, and they go, hey, did that really bug you when there was a period of, it seemed like 5 years in the 90s where like every crime film kind of had this like ironic bit, and they talked about TV shows and played music in a weird way, and everybody was a smart ass. Right? And they asked me like, well, did that bother you? And I go, well, no, it doesn't bother me. One, I don't think any of them are as good as mine, so it just makes mine look better and better, and my dialogue look better and better. But, you know, one of my favorite directors is Sergio Leone. And I always considered I was doing to traditional gangster films, like, you know, Scorsese kind of Goodfellas kind of movies, what he was doing to traditional Westerns when he did his spaghetti Westerns. So then the fact that mine hit, and now the fact that it wasn't that they were just trying to do Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs. They were trying to exist in the same subgenre of crime film that I had created, which is what all the other spaghetti Westerns that came after Leone's had done. So the fact that it wasn't they were doing just Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction ripoffs, I'd created a subgenre in gangster films that did not exist before, and they were trying to fill that subgenre. And that was fucking awesome.
That's got to be a wild feeling.
It was great. I
created a subgenre.
I had affected gangster films. I mean, by that point, to do kind of a Scorsese kind of thing was like almost passé.
Yeah. Well, you brought back John Travolta.
Yeah,
which is pretty wild, too.
Well, I remember even asking somebody, I go, okay, well, when people say Tarantino-esque, what do they mean? And there was a guy I knew, he was he's like a film analyst, his name Dave Scow. And he goes, well, okay, just to give you an idea, it's like, okay, so in Bad Boys, or yeah, I think it would it's like Bad Boys. I go, well, like in Bad Boys, okay, you have a couple of henchmen working for the bad guy, and they're sitting in their car, and all of a sudden they have a conversation about an I Love Lucy episode. Okay, that wouldn't have happened without you.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Yeah, well, what is that from? I mean, where have you had this this flair for references and this way of layering?
That just comes from being Gen X, man. I mean, that was the whole thing about about that generation, is the idea that the generation before us that like lived through the 60s, they had the 60s, they had the accoutrement of the 60s, they had all that 60s music. And they looked down on the generation that grew up in the 60s, in the 70s. So, like, you didn't have any of that shit. You didn't have the music that we had. Well, maybe we didn't have the music you had. We had our music. But what we did have is we had television. We had the Saturday morning cartoons that we dug. We had Schoolhouse Rock. We had all the TV shows we liked. We had Speed Racer. We had all these kind of things. And they meant something to us. And, you know, kids back then who, if their parents didn't let them watch TV at a certain point, well, the parents might have actually had like the best intentions, but they were actually robbing their children of the pop cultural glue that's going to tie them to their generation when they get older. And so, you know, we had the ABC movies of the week. I mean, we had all that stuff, and we had fucking great movies. If you were going out and seeing the movies of New Hollywood, we had all that. And so, when we got older, it was about talking about that stuff. That was what was worth talking about. And then to actually have characters in a movie talk about that was making them sound realistic. And to be specific about it. And you remember that old sitcom? No. Talk about, no, you mean Alice, okay? Talk about Mel and Alice.